3, 2, 1. Hi guys, welcome back. I initially was going to do a very different video this week, so I have shifted that video to next week because work has been hectic. I have not had the time to do a video in a similar style to my 28 days later video. So that's going to be coming next week, but instead, a couple of days ago, one of my viewers commented on my substance video. Zodiac Boy 42 commented asking for a similar style video for Longlegs, where I kind of recommend other films that you might like if you watched Longlegs and you really loved that and you don't know where to begin in finding some similar films. So in the same style of the substance video, we're going to start with the other films that Osgood Perkins has directed. Then we'll go into his direct influences for the film, and we will finish on movies that I kind of feel have basically the same vibe / for whatever reason have a similar vibe to me, personally to me. There's no rhyme or reason for it. It's just, to me, there is a similarity in the vibes, and I will attempt to articulate why there is a similarity in the vibes. But if I'm not able to, then just know that that last section is for me, and I hope that you like the movies that I recommend in it. But it is not in any way some sort of critical analysis, thinking, thought, whatever. I will say, Osgood Perkins, his films have a color grade to them. A lot of these films has that similar color grade. So this is where we're at. You know, the vibes are similar. I like them. I've watched them. When I was watching Longlegs, I was like, oh, that's kind of similar to that. And that's where we're kind of getting at with it. So let's just jump into it. The first film that we're going to talk about is Osgood Perkins' first ever film that he directed. I watched this movie when I was a teenager. I had no idea who directed it. It was like one of the first films that was on Australian Netflix. And I was just starting to get super into horror. And I remember watching it at a very pivotal age for my brain juice, and I fucking loved it. And I thought it was one of the most creative films I'd ever seen. I thought it was very depressing, as always. I am talking about The Blackcoat's Daughter. I think it's called February in some places, which has never been my reality, but I think it's got 2 names for whatever reason. But The Blackcoat's Daughter, it's got Kiernan Shipka in it. It's got Lucy something or other from the Freddie Mercury film, and it's also got Emma from American Horror Story. I am forgetting people's names today. So I'm pretty sure, unless I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that this was his first film, and going into it completely blind, having no idea what it was going to be about, I remember watching it and watching the trailer and being like, no clue what the fuck this is. And I will say, it's definitely one of those movies that you kind of have to watch more than once, because on the first watch, I kind of left it being like, wow, what was going on there? But then once you watch it a couple of times, it all starts to come together. I think the really cool thing about watching back Oz Perkins' 3 films he did before Longlegs is that you can kind of see him grow as a filmmaker. Spoiler alert, this is my favorite of the films that he did up until Longlegs. Longlegs is now my favorite. But basically, The Blackcoat's Daughter is about a boarding school set somewhere in a snowy, cold place. And it follows 2 girls who have to stay over winter, over the Christmas break, with some nuns or the teachers or whatever. And then things start to get a little bit creepy and things start to get a bit weird. And you're also kind of flashing to this other character played by Emma from American Horror Story, and you don't quite know how she ties into the story. So it's kind of got that devil worshipping kind of folk vibe to it that we know from Longlegs. I would say it is not a perfect film. I think there's still, you can kind of see that he's still in his infancy as a director, but it is my favorite of his 3 that he did prior to Longlegs, and I do really love it. So I would highly recommend. There's a lot of movies to go through, so I'm stressed that I'm feeling on a time limit with each of these. Okay, the next one, this is my least favorite of the 3 that he did prior to Longlegs. I am the pretty thing that lives in your house, or in the house. I am the pretty thing that lives in the house. I love the name of this film. The name of this film is really, really sick. And I think because I loved the name of it and it really captured me, I was like, fuck yeah. It's kind of one of those names that like, you're like, oh, I have an idea of what this is going to be. And then you watch the trailer and you're like, oh, I have an idea of what this is going to be. And then it's very different to that. So I'm the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House. It follows a hospice nurse who comes to start looking after a woman who's got dementia. Let me tell you, if you've got a family member who has had dementia, like I have, dementia horror films will always hit harder, and I will stick with that no matter what. This is a film that if you're a horror fan, you need to be a very specific type of horror fan. It's almost like a modern day film that's made like an 18th century Gothic novel. The climax is not climaxing. The characters are not charactering. It's a very simple story, and like everything is given away at the start. So that kind of tension never really builds to the degree that you are looking for from a film. As a brief, I feel like I didn't finish my brief plot summary, but hospice nurse comes to look after a woman with dementia, and as she's looking after her, she begins to become convinced that the house is haunted. So that's the overarching narrative. That's the narrative you get from the trailer as well, and you're kind of like, wow, this is really cool. It is an old school horror film. It is not something that is necessarily dynamic. It is not something that is nail biting. It is not something that is scary, if I'm being completely honest. And I do think that it is one of those movies that if you did like extension to English / any kind of film course, you'll look at it and be like, I can see what you were doing here. But it's that kind of self-indulgent student film that people make when they're young, and everything has a meaning and everything is like a double entendre to the bigger themes of the film, but then you're also laying out the themes really blankly, so there's kind of no point in trying to be elusive and creative, and that's the kind of vibe that it gives. It gives a film that you would study in school as like a related text to the novel that you're reading, and it's not as good as I was hoping it would be, especially after watching The Blackcoat's Daughter. I was like, he's only going to go up from here, and it's not a bad film, but I liked Blackcoat's Daughter better, so I would say he went down from there. And next we have Gretel and Hansel. Okay. I technically have watched I'm the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House more than I've watched Gretel and Hansel. I think because there was like more that I was looking for in I'm the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House. It's such I need to stop saying it because it's such a mouthful. Gretel and Hansel is like a gothic fairy retelling of the original fairy tale with a lot more of a focus on the witchy aspect, a lot more of a focus on Gretel, a lot more grim, for lack of, not to be punny, but a lot more grim, and a lot more kind of honed in on the backstory and the narrative behind all of these characters, and as opposed to just people appearing in the woods and then being brought into this sweet house and eaten, blah, 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 blah. I don't really like this movie. I don't really like the Hansel and Gretel fairy tale. I feel like it's been done to fucking death. Like, I still remember that really weird Gemma Arterton and old mate from Avengers. What's his name? He was in the 28 Days Later movie. I am not for names today. I cannot remember his name, but I still remember that fucking weird action movie where they were turned into like superheroes. And I just feel like as though it's done a bit to death. And I think the cool thing that you can see is Blackcoat's Daughter, he wrote and directed his first film, clearly spent a lot of time on it. You can see that it's a very unique story and narrative, and he kind of put his soul into it, right? And it's really promising. I'm the Pretty Thing That Lives in the Walls. You can see how he's starting to try to play around a lot more with like themes and with film techniques and all these kinds of things. And he's obviously making a love story to original Gothic horror films. The third one, Gretel and Hansel, you can see him try and go bigger. You can see him try and take on a bigger budget, him kind of try and take on a bigger narrative, do a remake, kind of take his own spin on something, and like go big or go home. With all of this, it feels like a journey to Longlegs, and that I appreciate and admire. Gretel and Hansel is not for me. I think it's a fine film. I think you should watch it if you're a fan of the Hansel and Gretel fairy tale. Hell yeah, put her name in front, we love. But like, it's a retelling, it's gothic, it's dark, it's fucking depressing, but it's witchy, and we love witchy, you know? Now let's move into the films that influenced Longlegs. These are not going to be surprising in the slightest. If you've watched the film, then you're going to, which I hope you would have if you're on this video, watch Longlegs. Before continuing, pause this, go watch Longlegs, come back. But these are not going to be surprising because you know, Longlegs is a film about a cop trying to take down a, for lack of a better term, I guess, like cultish, religious, fanatic leader kind of person who's murdering a bunch of people, serial killer. Crazy that Silence of the Lambs will be the first on the list. It's the most obvious comparison, and Oz Perkins has done so many interviews talking about how it influenced him, but like they are still very different films. I do not think in any way he can be accused of trying to like copy Silence of the Lambs. That is not the world that he has built his own world for this. I've also just realized I'm going to fix my necklace for any of the viewers who are being bothered by this. I'm going to sort it out for you, one sec. Also, I apologize if you can hear my washing machine in the background. It's a public holiday in Australia, and so I'm getting some chores done. If for whatever reason you haven't watched Silence of the Lambs, it's one of the best movies of all time. I would highly recommend it. I think it's an incredible film. It is not necessarily a horror film, but it is a film that has a lot of love from the horror community because it is horror adjacent, which I will say in this section, a lot of the films are horror adjacent. Psychological thriller, horror to some, where a young female detective is trying to catch a serial killer. To do so, she kind of goes to a famous serial killer played by Anthony Hopkins called Hannibal Lecter, who advises her in helping her catch him. So it's about the relationship between this young detective, Clarice, and this serial killer who is like both helping her but manipulating her, and it's like, why does he only want to speak to her? Like very kind of Blacklist vibes, where it's like criminal becomes infatuated with cop and wants to help, but then also is kind of like, what's going on there? Why do we care about her? So this is kind of where we're at with Longlegs and where the influence comes in from. It's very similar detective vibes, very similar kind of cold, dark aesthetic. And honestly, I couldn't recommend it more. It's one of the best films ever. And I think that anybody should watch it, even though it's an older one for you kids. Next we have Seven, another horror adjacent film. This one is definitely like a crime film. It's got Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman in it. They're trying to track down a serial killer. I was about to say who that serial killer was played by, but I will not, because that is part of the plot and part of the film. Very, 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 very good film. Known for what's in the box? Yet again, it is these two detectives, young detective Brad Pitt, gun, trying to like work his way up. Old detective Morgan Freeman, meant to retire, comes in for one last case. This is the kind of vibe that we're getting. The acting is incredible. The film is incredible. It's the influences in the tracking down of the serial killer and the way that that serial killer then kind of communicates back with the police, which is something that's not really in Silence of the Lambs, but like in Seven, it's like more of a cat and mouse game where the killer is aware that they're chasing him and he starts to play games with the cops, and like that kind of interaction and relationship between the cops and the killer is something that I think is very directly translated into the relationship between Micah Monroe's character and Nicolas Cage's character. Very good film. Definitely highly recommend. Should be watched. Then we have Zodiac. I haven't seen this movie in so long. I've actually put it on my list to rewatch because I'm talking about it in this film. And I always want to watch like all the movies I talk about in my videos, but there is just not enough hours in the day until I quit my job and do this full time. That will be a very good day when that eventually happens, manifesting. But Zodiac, if you have not heard of it before, it is a film about the Zodiac killer, and it's biographical, I guess, from the perspective of a journalist who was following the case at the time and following the detectives who were trying to track down the Zodiac killer. And it goes into the letters, the deciphering of the letters, yet again, that kind of relationship between the killer wanting to be involved in the investigation, wanting them to know he's smart, he's here, it's not, these are the things. So yeah, I would say out of the three of them, if you're only going to watch two, watch Seven and Silence of the Lambs, but Zodiac is still very, very good. I would say it's probably the most different to Longlegs out of all the films. Obviously, if you have heard of the Zodiac case, you know it's an unsolved case, so it's not like as though you get a fucking resolution at the end of that movie. It's a very different kind of film. It's a lot more of a straight up crime drama. I would say it's the least horror of the three, but it's still very good, and you can very easily see the influences for Longlegs when you watch it. Next film. I've seen a lot of chatter about this film online recently because there's like a very famous like Stanley Kubrick thought it was the scariest movie he had ever seen kind of buzzword. I watched a really good little, I've seen the movie. It is very, very good, but to refresh my memory, I watched a little video. I'll put the link to it down below by, was it by? I watched a really good little refresher, like quick little 8-minute video by Uncle Funtime. Great video, small channel, so I wanted to give him a little shout out because I'm also a small channel, which was really, really great. And basically German film about a man whose wife goes missing on a road trip, and it follows him kind of like obsessively trying to figure out what happened to her. Yet again, Stanley Kubrick said it was the scariest movie he had ever seen. Not a horror film, definitely a thriller, but I think I'm trying to think of how much to say. If you watch it, you can see, it's German language, you'll have to watch it with subtitles, but if you watch it, you can see how the relationship between like having the POV of the killer, is this saying too much? Okay, brief slight spoiler warnings for this movie, because I do think The Vanishing is really good to go in completely blind, but brief slight spoiler warnings. In a similar way to how early on in Longlegs we switch to Nicolas Cage's POV, there is a POV shift in The Vanishing to the killer's perspective, and you kind of start to understand his motivation, start to understand more about him. And I do think that is something that quite clearly translates into Longlegs. There's also that like overwhelming sense of like mystery that you don't know if you're going to get an answer at the end of the film, and you kind of don't. It's ambiguous to a degree. And in a similar way to in Longlegs, how even though they're cut and dry cases, we know who killed these families. It was like the fathers in the families. We know who killed them, but there's still that little question mark unknown of what happened and of why there's a letter. Why was there another person there? Who was that person that ties all these cases together? And it, in a similar way to The Vanishing, we now know who did it. We know that he's trying to chase him. Like the husband's trying to chase him, but we don't know exactly what happened. And we get these little pieces and points of and little moments in both the killer's life and the husband's life and the memories of the lead up to when she disappeared, but there's still this overarching question mark over what actually happened on that day. So very, very good film, very unsettling. All of these are like psychological horrors basically, or psychological thriller films, and I would highly recommend. The last movie that I'm going to talk about in this little sector is The Omen, the original Omen. Original Omen, very, very good film. Has had some very interesting sequels. The recent sequel though, very good. Enjoyed. Thought that the acting was incredible. Thought that there was a really great possession scene in there. What is this? Is this my hair? This is my hair. Why do I feel like I'm messing with my own hair? There we go. The Omen is about the Antichrist, which we love. The Antichrist is a child, a chosen one, kind of creepy kid, kind of adults influencing kids to be fucking creepy and do these things. The Omen, if you have not heard, or you would have heard a reference to it, it's a very famous film, basically follows a father as he realizes that his adopted son is the Antichrist. Is pretty crazy. It's very good. It's got 1,000,001 remakes / sequels, but I would say the original is really great, and it does look like the series is going in a pretty good direction. Perkins very specifically mentioned this film as one of his influences for Longlegs, as a lot of, like, this film is mentioned by a lot of horror directors as influencing them. I think the style, I think the like kind of cold, drawn out vibe of the film feels very reminiscent of Longlegs. Also the kind of having like children be in this, like, you know that the child is the center of the problem, but you don't know why / how, if it's the child specifically that is the center of the problem. I think very directly to Kin Shipka's character when thinking about like the Omen in relation to Longlegs, and I feel like as though that'll give you kind of a vibe of what I'm talking about without me going too deep into spoilers and all of that. But like, as I said, it's pretty point blank period with the Omen. Antichrist, aka Damien, trying to be like people trying to figure out what the fuck's going on. All right, and now we go into the section of the vibes. My vibes of the films that I think that if you liked watching Longlegs, you will like, because I liked them and they reminded me of Longlegs. The first one I'm going to talk about is very, very specific to me. It is a Robert Eggers film, and it is The Witch. The reason why is because The Witch and The Blackcoat's Daughter were both on Netflix at the same time. And so they are intrinsically linked in my brain because I watched them, I think, 2 days apart. They are both folk horror. yeah, they are both folk horror, I would say. There is a devil aspect to them, a little white girl running around doing creepy shit. It gives off similar energy. And I recently rewatched The Witch because I was watching Nosferatu and living my best Robert Eggers life. And in watching The Witch, I was like, fuck, like this does have a very reminiscent feeling to Longlegs, in like you're watching this character and you're watching her kind of going down the path of trying to understand her own connection to evil and seeing how is she linked to evil and why does she have such a close connection to the evil that is surrounding her. It's like in a similar way to how Micah Monroe is like, why does my mum have a connection to these characters? Anya Taylor-Joy's character is like, why am I always in the places that the witch seems to be doing her damn thing? So if you haven't seen it, The Witch is Robert Eggers' first feature film that he directed. It stars Anya Taylor-Joy in like one of her first breakout roles. It is a literal pagan film. Like they speak in ye old English times. They only light it with the lighting that they would have had at the time. They built the set in very exactly the way that they would have built the set at the time. It's very specific to the time period. And it follows this family who leaves their pagan? No. Protestant? No. Whatever the like super hardcore religious people in ye old day England was. Pilgrims, that feels right. The ones with the buckle hats. Sorry, I'm Australian as hell, man. The ones with the buckle hats, they leave their kind of group of their town for being too religious. That's what we're at. They're being too extreme. So they move to a house on the edge of the woods, and then things start to go wrong and the family starts to blame the devil, and then it starts to blame the eldest daughter of being a witch, and we follow along her journey as that happens. It is a brilliant film. I think it is not a horror film in the traditional sense. Like my sister said that she watched it with her friends not knowing anything about it and was like kind of disappointed because they were just wanting to watch a horror film. I think do not do that. It is a horror film. Don't get me wrong. Am I sitting there on the edge of my seat? No. But is it a horror film? Yes. Like it's very different to a jump scare conjuring type film, but I think it is an art piece. And I think it is one that is great and people should watch. The next one, it's pretty obvious why I would say this, but It Follows also stars Micah Monroe, also has a color grading that is reminiscent of Longlegs. Micah Monroe is just like such a brilliant actress and a scream queen in her own right, in every right. Like she deserves all the accolades and she carries Longlegs just as much as Nicolas Cage does, if not more. It Follows is it was another one that came out in that early Netflix period where like it was just banger after banger with these horror films until they started like whipping out the real shitty ones. But like for the first year that Netflix launched in Australia, every horror film that came out, I was like, fuck yeah, that little indie film that I've never heard of before, fuck yeah, that's amazing. Because before that, it was only what you saw in the cinemas. And like, that was only kind of shit, especially in the 2010s. Like, it's fucking Eli Roth. We all know my beef with Eli Roth. Okay, anyway. So It Follows is basically one gigantic allegory for STDs. But separate to that, girl comes into contact with a guy. They have sex, just as like fun young people do, as they should, no dramas. And then she wakes up the next morning, he has tied her to a chair and he is like, I'm so sorry to do this, but I needed to sleep with someone so that it would leave me alone. Basically, this creature, we know nothing about it, we never find anything out about it. It is fucking terrifying. It will follow you until it kills you. The only way to stop it from following you is to have sex with someone else to pass it on. But if that person dies, then it will go back to trying to kill the original person that passed on to you. So you kind of want to go and have sex with a sex worker who's going to then have sex with like 100 people or something, so that then those 100 people go have sex with 100 other people, and then you kind of dilute it so that there's not only one other person who needs to die before it comes to you. Basically, Micah Monroe, she's like a teen, like she's like just post high school, so she's like 19 or something like that. And it follows her trying to convince her friends of this thing happening, and then her trying to deal with this thing happening without just like passing it on to another person, trying to actually deal with it without killing someone, essentially. It's a really brilliant film. I fucking love it. I think there's a sequel that's going to come out. The acting is incredible. I had not seen Michael Monroe in anything before this, I don't think. I think this was my first time seeing her. She does an incredible performance. And it's one of those indie horror films that I think has definitely had its accolades. I wouldn't say it's underrated in any sense. Like, people do definitely have a space for it in their mind. But if you haven't heard of it and you haven't seen it, go and watch it. It is brilliant. Next, we have The House That Jack Built. This is one that I feel like it doesn't get talked about that much, which I understand why, because it's kind of a weird movie and it's kind of like a little bit art house expressionist in the way that it like is made. It follows we're in the POV of a serial killer who is basically narrating and going through 5 different acts that he has committed in his life as like a proud serial killer. And he is telling the, I think, Greek poet Virgil all of these things to try and convince him that he belongs in heaven. So yes, Dante's Inferno. If you've read Dante's Inferno, there is definite connections to it. If you've watched As Above, So Below, there is definite connections to it. But we're in the POV of this serial killer as he kind of tries to justify his murders as art. And as somebody who works in music, real like pseudo-intellectual shit fucks with me. I hate it. And like specifically pseudo-intellectual man, like no offense. Like I do not think that a man expressing himself and his art and his creativity is inherently cringy. I do think that what this film is trying to comment on is something that I definitely think most people have experienced, where a man or a woman is standing in front of you and trying to make what they have just done into this big conceptual fucking thing that means so much than what we're seeing, and like we just don't get it because we're not on that level. And it's like, no, you're an idiot. And that's kind of what this film's trying to show. Like, not trying to show that Jack's an idiot, but it's trying to show that like this guy is a serial killer. He basically he allowed his most primal base urges to overcome any rational or empathetic thought, and he's trying to convince one of the most intelligent men on the planet, Virgil, that he belongs in heaven. And that's just fucking like, not to spoil the ending, but like, is it gonna happen, is it not? You know? It's a very interesting film. I think it's worthwhile watching. Huge trigger warnings, very fucking graphic. The director of this film, what's his name again? Lars von Trier, controversial for 1,000,001 different reasons, but with this film specifically, there is very graphic depictions of animal abuse / killing / torture, and there are also children who like he does not shy away from any of this shit. So if you're gonna watch it, know that shit happens. Find the time codes online and skip ahead if you can't deal with it, but they are in there for a reason, to be provocative essentially. So do as you will with that information. Good film, acting is incredible, not a cut and dry horror film, but a very interesting film that I think doesn't get talked about as much as it potentially should. But I also can understand why, because Lars von Trier is like kind of controversial. As an Australian, I would be remiss if I did not mention The Babadook. The Babadook is, how do you even explain the plot of The Babadook? Mum, son, husband dies in car accident, mum grieving. Kid, undiagnosed fucking ADHD issues, one of the most annoying fucking kids in the world, but fair love, all the love to it. He gets progressively better throughout the film, but at the start, I cannot guarantee I wouldn't have decked him in the fucking face if I was not his parent / punching children is wrong, but like, holy shit, is he fucking annoying. He's the worst. And basically grieving lots of issues in the household after the father dies. All of a sudden one day they find this book in the kids' bookshelf called The Babadook, and it follows this creature who's like, knock, 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 the Babadook comes in, blah, 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 fairy tale creature, and they start to be haunted by this creature, which is quite clearly an allegory for the grief that the family is experiencing and the mental health issues that the mother is experiencing and how she needs to tackle those. It is a brilliant fucking film. It is very dark. It is very sad. I would say it is not one for when you're having a bad mental health day, but I think it's a beautiful film and it's an incredible feature film debut. So props to that. You will notice a lot. Vibe-wise, I can't really put it into words why I feel like this has a similar vibe to Longlegs, but you just gotta have to trust me that I think if you watch it, you will agree. Next, we have another Netflix film that I feel like people don't really talk that much about, which I kind of understand because it didn't blow me out of the fucking water or anything, but I thought it was very interesting. and I liked that it was interesting. So it's a movie called The Night House. A woman is in her lake house, otherwise known as the Night House, and her husband has committed suicide. And we follow her as she is grieving and moving through all of this. And then she starts to feel a supernatural presence in the house, and she starts to investigate more into her husband's life, and things unravel as they unravel. It is a brilliant film. It has a similar tone in terms of unraveling secrets about family, kind of investigating and pushing on pain points that you have never wanted to push before, which I think is something that we all kind of can relate to some degree of, like, your mum's like, oh, I really don't want to talk about that. And you're like, but I feel like I should know, but you don't want to push it. And so you leave it until one day it all eventually comes out, whatever. That is the vibes, but times 10,000 is what I'll say. It's a very good film. I think it's a very creative film. I really like the execution of the film. I think it could be better. And that's where I'll end that. The Night House. Go watch it. It's on Netflix. It's for free. I think people should make their own mind about it. I don't think it's incredible, but I don't think it's bad. I initially was not going to mention this film, but I understand why it comes up so much as one that is a good comparison. Hereditary. If you do not know Hereditary, Toni Collette and what's his name? Alex is the name. What is his name? He's in a bunch of horror films. We love him. Alex Wolff. Yep. Naked Brothers Band. Yep, that was correct. I didn't even need to Google it. Alex Wolff and Toni Collette put on maybe the performance on their lives. It is fucking incredible. A family is going through grief. Crazy how that happens. Family is going through grief, and the grandma, like the matriarch of the family, dies, and they start to unravel things about her. She's kind of like this weird religious leader in this like group, and people don't really understand why. And then as things unravel, the family kind of descends into despair, let's just say. I don't want to say too much because I think Hereditary is an absolutely incredible film, and I think that you should go and watch it. That is my very brief synopsis of that. Does not tell you anything, because there is no way that you will watch that film and not be like, for most of it. So go and watch Hereditary. The reason I wasn't going to mention it is because I think it's like a very easy comparison, but I also think that it has such marked differences that when I watched Longlegs, I was worried people would be like, oh my God, it's the new Hereditary. And it's like, I think that they exist in different worlds and different spheres. But what I will say is that I think that they are both the best of the folk horror genre, which is a genre I love. Like, I fucking love. And I do think Longlegs is like less folk horror because it's quite directly like talking about this very specific demon type devil person that they are worshipping, and like it's very religious. But folk horror for me doesn't need to necessarily be pagan. Folk horror is a vibe. It's a concept, you know? It's not tangible in why I believe that there is some connections. But what I will say is that the vibes are immaculate for both films. I think both should be watched. And I do think that if you like Longlegs, you will like Hereditary. They are both incredible films. And that's it. Those are my movies. I feel like I managed to keep this fairly concise. I apologize that it's not the longest of videos, but also I don't think you guys care. Please, as you can see from this video, I will take and always take into account viewers' requests for videos. I will love to hear what you guys would like to see from me over the next couple of months. I will continue to upload weekly. The day will change depending on my time, but every week we will be uploading a new video. So thank you so much for watching. If you liked this, please like the video, subscribe, all that kind of stuff, and let me know anything that you'd like to see in the future. Thank you so much.